George was about to settle in for the night when his dog Bim started to act strangely. A good, clever dog, Bim never made a fuss for no reason. George had found him 8 years ago as a whimpering, lost, and lonely puppy, perhaps a few weeks old. Someone from a nearby village had probably been heading to the lake to drown the poor thing but couldn't bring themselves to do it, leaving him on the road instead. A swift end was guaranteed either way. But when George saw that pathetic, doomed creature, his heart ached with a deep old pain. He had once been just as alone, just as unwanted. People had wanted to get rid of him too. So he'd picked up the puppy, brought him back to his gamekeeper's cabin, and nursed him back to health. In time, Bim became his best friend and helper. It would be hard to imagine a more loyal companion. A dog like this was exactly what a lonely gamekeeper needed. And now Bim was acting strangely, running back and forth to the door, clearly trying to pull his master outside, looking him straight in the eyes as if urging him to hurry. Reluctantly, George put on his Wellington boots, pulled on his thick parka, and tied his Ushanka hat under his chin. He glanced longingly at the cozy, soft, and inviting armchair next to the log fire. But Bim was performing an intricate dance of impatience at the door. He had to go. He had to check what was happening in the woods. His dog wouldn't make a fuss for nothing. George slung his rifle over his shoulder and followed Bim out. He had always loved the forest. He'd grown up in a nearby village, running into the pine woods as a child, with his friends to pick raspberries, collect pine cones for the fire, or just play. How carefree those first 10 years had been. And then his mother, a young, healthy-looking woman, passed away, and little George was left alone with his father. That's when the troubles began. He didn't want to remember all the hardship he'd faced. But in the end, everything had worked out, though he never would have imagined it. He'd met a kind person who hadn't passed him by, a person who had helped him get his life back on track, regain his strength, and find his purpose. And so, George became a gamekeeper, living a quiet, peaceful, and tranquil life in his cabin in the middle of the forest, just as he had always wanted. The sounds of the forest were always a remedy for him. The sight of tall trees brought him peace, and the sound of the wind through the leaves lifted his spirits. People, on the other hand, had never been good for him. Perhaps it was his nature, or perhaps he'd simply endured too much hardship at their hands. George was perfectly content with his solitary life. He had friends who would occasionally visit him at the cabin to escape the city for a few days, and he was always glad to see them. But he had no desire to return to the village, or even worse, the city. The stories his friends told about their lives held no appeal for him. The forest was his true home. His friends even jokingly called him the forest spirit, a nickname George was fond of. He truly was a forest spirit. Of course, he knew he wasn't young anymore. Soon he would have to retire and return to his father's old house in the village. But he didn't want to think about that just yet. Right now, he was hurrying after Bim. It was already dark, so the gamekeeper lit his way with a torch. The snow sparkled beautifully in the warm yellow light. He had lived in the forest for a long time, but he never lost his awe for the beauty of nature. Suddenly, the torchlight caught a tiny figure in the darkness. It looked unnatural, strangely out of place against the backdrop of the silent winter forest. Bim was already circling the figure, sniffing and wagging his tail. So this was why the dog had pulled him out of his warm cabin late at night. It was a little girl, no more than 3 or 4 years old. She was wearing a bright pink padded jacket, a funny hat with a large bauble, and beautiful Wellington boots embroidered with beads. Her clothes were clearly expensive and well suited for winter, yet she wouldn't have lasted more than a couple of hours in the freezing night. Without a second thought, George took off his jacket, wrapped her in it, and began rubbing her pale cheeks, where the first signs of frostbite were already visible. "Quickly, quickly, we need to get her to a warm place," he said to himself. The girl urgently needed a cup of hot tea next to the roaring fire. Everything else could wait. Don't be scared, little one," George said as he rushed to the cabin. Bim obediently trotted alongside him, calm now that his mission was accomplished. George never ceased to be amazed by his 4-legged friend's keen intuition. "I'll get you warm, and then we'll find your parents. Everything will be all right, you hear? Everything will be all right now. The dog did a great job. He found you. Now everything will be all right." George worried that the girl would be afraid of him. A big, bearded man from the woods. a forest spirit. It would have been a natural reaction. The poor child had already been through the stress of getting lost and being alone in the forest. And now this character appears, wraps her in his jacket, and carries her away. But the girl seemed surprisingly detached and indifferent, looking from George to the forest and back again without asking a single question. It would have made more sense if she had cried, or if her face had shown fear, surprise, or any emotion at all. But she looked like a doll. Of course, George didn't know much about children, but he could tell something was wrong with this little girl. In the warmth of his cabin, the small guest quickly thawed out. Her cheeks turned rosy and her eyes sparkled. She was a very pretty girl, fair-haired, with big eyes and a button nose, but she seemed so withdrawn. Maybe something had frightened her so badly, or maybe it was something else. She didn't refuse the cup of warm milk George offered, eagerly gulping down the drink and a piece of bread generously spread with honey. George tried to get a word out of her. She was still very young, but children her age usually talked, even in their own baby language. You could at least understand something. George remembered when one of his friends had stayed with him with his little grandson, who was the same age as this strange girl. That boy had showered him with questions and curiously looked at everything around him, but this little girl behaved completely differently. "What's your name, sweetheart?" George asked, looking into her big blue eyes. "How did you end up here?" Of course, there was no answer. The warmth of the cabin quickly put her to sleep. George carefully carried her to his sofa, adjusted the pillow, and covered her with a wool blanket. She needed to warm up properly. It looked like she'd been out in the cold for several hours. Tomorrow, when it got light, George would take her to the village on his sledge to find her parents. It was too late now. The cold was only getting worse, and it was unsafe to walk through the woods at night. A pack of wolves had been seen in the area. And as luck would have it, his old mobile phone, which his boss had given him, had stopped working today. He would have to show it to someone who could fix it. George did need a way to communicate with the outside world. What if, for instance, he needed to call the village and tell them about his find? It was clear her parents must be looking for her and were probably beside themselves with worry. He couldn't even send word to the mainland that he had found the child and that she was all right. Although, of course, she wasn't completely all right. She was so strange, withdrawn, silent. She hadn't cried and had calmly let him pick her up, yet she wouldn't speak. Something was wrong with her. The girl was sleeping soundly on the sofa under the warm blanket. In her sleep, she looked like a true angel. George smiled. He had never had children of his own, but looking at other people's children always filled his heart with tenderness. They were so fragile, so defenseless, and so completely unaware of the world. They all had a long life ahead of them. Who would they become when they grew up? Bim stretched out on his mat by the window. George arranged 2 chairs to make a makeshift bed, put his rolled-up parka under his head, covered himself with a blanket, and also fell asleep. In the morning, he would need to get up early, feed the little girl, wrap her up warmly, get the sledge from the shed, and head to the village to find her parents. Poor people. They would have to spend the night in terrible anxiety. In the morning, there was a knock on the door, so loud and desperate that the window panes rattled. George jumped up from his makeshift bed and looked out the window. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the trees stood motionless in the pre-dawn gloom. The small guest had also been woken by the knock. She sat on the sofa, rubbing her eyes. George thought she would act differently in the morning, but the girl, just like the night before, seemed completely detached from everything that was happening. The noise had woken her, but it hadn't scared or surprised her. Bim barked a few times, a threatening sound. He didn't like this situation. Someone was trying to break into their cabin in the morning. Like a true guardian, he was protecting his territory. George got up. He knew this early visit was somehow related to the girl he had found in the woods. He approached the door and asked the obvious question. "Who's there?" "We're looking for a child," a worried male voice answered. "We lost our daughter. Please help us find her." George opened the door. On the doorstep stood a man, tall, young, and handsome, dressed in fashionable, expensive clothes. He looked very much like the little girl, with the same big blue eyes and a slightly upturned nose. He was anxious, pale, and desperate. Next to him was a teenage girl, who George was completely shocked to see. She was sullen and very pale too, with so much unspeakable pain and fear in her eyes. It was difficult to look at this hunched-over child. She's with me, the gamekeeper said, letting them into the house. I found her yesterday. My phone was broken, so I couldn't call. I was going to take her to the village this morning. Mila, the man exclaimed, rushing to the sofa. He scooped the girl into his arms, quickly checked if she was all right, and began covering her face with kisses. The older girl also came over to the little one. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her face showed relief, but the pain in her dark, anxious eyes remained. The man took out his phone and hastily dialed a number. Annie, everything's fine. We found her. She's all right. Yes, call the police and tell them to stand down. We'll fill out all the necessary paperwork later. No, she's completely fine. We'll be back soon. George watched the older girl in silence. She looked at the little one as if wanting to hug her but didn't dare. And the little girl just looked at the visitors with the same detached gaze, completely untouched by the waves of emotion that were overwhelming them. What's wrong with her? George asked the older girl. Her father was still on the phone with his wife, presumably the little girl's mother. She's always like this. It's an illness, the older girl said. That's what the doctor told us. That's a tragedy, George said, shaking his head. He wanted to distract this girl with something to make her happy, to surprise her, to chase away the sadness in her dark, watchful eyes. It was unbearable to see that expression. This is my dog Bim. He's the one who found her in the woods. He saved her. Come on, my friend, give me your paw. Bim obediently came over to his master and offered his heavy paw with its soft brown pads. The girl smiled slightly, and George's heart warmed. This trick always worked. Children were always thrilled by Bim's abilities. Thank you so much. I'll be indebted to you for the rest of my life, the man said. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have survived. It's so cold. She would never have made it. Thank him, George said, nodding towards Bim. He's the one who found your treasure. How did she end up in the woods? Did she get lost or what? The older girl suddenly burst into tears. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her thin body was racked with sobs. She was having a full-blown meltdown. Instead of comforting his daughter, the man looked at her with anger, contempt, almost disgust. George recoiled. He knew that look all too well. It was the same way his father had looked at him when his stepmother moved into the house. George immediately felt a connection with the older girl. He wanted to shield her from that hurtful gaze. Didn't her father understand the irreparable harm he was inflicting on his child right now, at this very moment? It's a long story, the man finally said. But you saved Mila. So you have the right to know. And I need to get this off my chest. The police will be here soon, and I'm afraid you'll have to answer a few questions. It's just protocol. While they're on their way, I'll tell you everything. It was clear the man needed to talk. A heavy burden was weighing on his soul. He had gone through a terrible night, not knowing where his child was, and now that the little girl was sitting on his lap, his anxiety was slowly leaving him. William lived in a village not far from the forest, but not the one where George's old house was. This was a neighboring village, larger and closer to the town center. Unlike his friends, William didn't yearn for city life. He loved working the land, running his farm, and looking after his animals. He had chosen the life of a farmer, and his produce sold out in no time. His business was thriving, and he considered himself a happy man. He had a strong home, a big farm, a job he loved, a stable income, and most importantly, a beloved wife. His beautiful and intelligent wife, Helen. There was only one thing that overshadowed the young couple's happiness. They couldn't have a child. They had been to doctors, undergone treatments, even consulted with healers, but nothing worked. William was okay, but his wife was suffering, and he found it difficult to see her like that. He had been in love with Helen since school, and had never dared to dream that she would one day be his wife. William had promised Helen that he would make her happy, and tried his best to anticipate her every wish, fulfilling her every whim. But not everything was in his power. After 10 years of marriage, when everyone had given up hope, a miracle finally happened. One day, Helen realized she was pregnant. The couple's joy was boundless. The pregnancy was difficult, however, with complications, and Helen had to be admitted to the hospital many times. William literally carried her in his arms during those months, not letting her lift anything heavier than a cup of tea. They were expecting their first child, and they were happy, making plans for the future. Katie was born prematurely, but it was fortunate that Helen was in the hospital at the time, or the baby wouldn't have survived. Helen, however, didn't survive the birth. She didn't even get to see her daughter or hear her first cry. The doctors tried everything, but they were helpless. William's young and beloved wife was gone. The man was devastated. He looked haggard, aged instantly, and shut himself off from everyone in his home, not even letting his close friends, who genuinely wanted to help the young widower, through the door. During that difficult time, he blamed his newborn daughter for everything. If it weren't for her, Helen would be with him now. They had lived without children, and it was fine. What was he supposed to do now? Meanwhile, the doctors fought for the life of the weak, premature baby girl. Little Katie lay in an incubator, tangled in tubes, tiny, thin, and pale. Just a little while ago, she had been a source of joy and the meaning of life for her parents. And now, in an instant, she was completely alone. Her father didn't even call the hospital to check on her condition. It seemed the girl felt this, and she slowly started to fade despite the doctor's best efforts. William, meanwhile, started drinking. Alcohol helped him escape from the terrible reality. Then came the heavy hangovers and dark thoughts, but at least for a while his mind was in a blissful haze. Even after his beloved wife's funeral, his farm slowly fell into disrepair, but the grieving William didn't seem to care. Then, exactly 9 days after his wife's passing, he had a dream. He saw her, sitting in their living room, looking at him with a sad, loving gaze. William rushed to her, hugged her, and sobbed uncontrollably. "Why did you leave me?" he asked his wife. "I don't want to live here without you. What's the point of this life?" "I didn't want to leave, but it happened," Helen said, shaking her head sadly. "But it's not your time yet. Your time won't come for a long time. You're needed here." "Why? What's the point of this life without you?" "Katie, our daughter, she needs your love. She needs your protection. Save her." William woke up on the floor. He had drunk so much that he hadn't even made it to his bed. Helen had appeared in his dreams before, but this time he felt as if she had come from another world, breaking through for a moment to give him an important message, to bring him back to life. He went straight to the bathroom, his head cleared. Helen wasn't coming back, but he had a daughter now. She was a part of his beloved wife, her continuation, and his baby girl was in the hospital. To his shame, William realized he hadn't even once checked on her. How was she? Did she need medicine or nappies? The next morning, William was at the hospital. They even showed him the girl. She was so fragile, so small. His heart was filled with pity and tenderness, and tears welled up in his eyes. The doctor said the baby's condition was critical. In a couple of days, everything would be decided. Either she would get better, or he didn't even want to think about the second option. "Come on, Katie. Come on, darling. Be strong," William whispered, looking at the little one through the incubator glass. It was hard to believe, but the girl seemed to sense her father's support. She opened her eyes and looked straight at him, a watchful, studying gaze. William gasped in amazement and instantly knew everything would be all right. Katie did get better quickly. She started to gain weight and learned to breathe and drink formula from a bottle on her own. She grew stronger every day. William now visited his daughter regularly. The nurses allowed him into her ward, seeing that the tiny patient felt better after her father's visits. Perhaps little Katie had realized that she was needed in this world, and that's why she fought so hard. A month later, William was picking her up from the hospital. His friends were there for the release, as was his mother, who had come from far away to help for the first time. Helen's parents had long passed away. They would have helped raise the baby too. William knew that his mother would eventually have to go back home, where she had her own farm, a sick husband, and other grandchildren. She wouldn't be able to stay with William forever. Still, his mother helped the new father a great deal. She taught him how to care for an infant, organized the household, and supported him. Together, they raised Katie until she was a year old. His mother couldn't stay any longer. She had to return to her own life, which required her constant attention. By that time, William had fully embraced his role as a father, or so he thought. But it soon became clear that juggling farm work with looking after a baby was no easy task. If he worked on the farm, his child suffered, and household chores piled up. If he took care of Katie, his business would stall, and money would become a problem. The man was torn between his daughter and his farm. One day, William realized he couldn't go on like this. Although he didn't want to entrust his baby to a stranger, he hired a nanny. It was Anna, a neighbor's daughter. She was a young, modest girl who had raised several of her siblings, so she clearly knew how to care for babies. Anna was looking for a job at the time. The shop where she worked as an assistant had closed and she was out of work. So she gladly agreed to be a nanny for the young widower for a good salary. There was another reason she was happy to go to the young widower's house. William was respected and pitied in the village. He was considered the ideal man in the eyes of the local girls. Hardworking, responsible, loyal, handsome, and a true rarity, he didn't drink. No one counted the bender he'd been on after his wife's tragedy. Anna was no exception. She had had a crush on her handsome neighbor for a long time. His suffering had given his manly face a noble look. The girl dreamed that he would pay her some attention, but he was indifferent to women, still grieving his loss. But then William offered her a job looking after his daughter for a decent wage. Of course, Anna gladly accepted. She knew how to care for small children. It wasn't something she loved, but it wasn't a chore either. Anna took on the job with enthusiasm. During the day, she took care of Katie. She fed her, took her for walks, and bathed her. She also did the household chores, dusting, laundry, cleaning, and cooked delicious dinners for William. When he came home, she was always tidy, with her hair combed and light makeup on, wearing something that showed off her figure. She wanted this man to like her. She wanted to see interest, perhaps even admiration, in his eyes. Anna was beautiful, and she knew it. For a long time, William remained indifferent. He thanked Anna for her care, paid her extra for the housework, and gave her compliments, but not the kind Anna wanted to hear. William praised her cooking and noted Katie's progress, which was clearly thanks to her, but nothing more. Anna tried. She tried very hard to charm William. She smiled at him, encouraged him, and drew him into long, heartfelt conversations in which he poured out his sorrow, lightening his soul. William still loved Helen very much. Anna just wished he would feel even a fraction of that for her. One day, Katie got sick. It was a common childhood infection, and Anna had seen it 100 times in her younger siblings. But William was truly scared. In the middle of the night, he knocked on Anna's parents' door. He had also called an ambulance, but it took a long time to get to their village. The man felt his daughter was dying. The girl gave the baby a fever reducer, and the fever gradually went down, as did William's tension. By the time the ambulance arrived, the child was already fine and fast asleep. The doctor prescribed some medicine and left. Anna and William were left sitting in the half-lit living room. "Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you," he said. "It's nothing serious, just a common cold. It happens to kids," she said. "I know, but I'm so scared for her. I feel like she's so fragile, so vulnerable. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to her." "She'll be fine," Anna assured him. "Katie is a strong, healthy girl. Don't worry. I don't want you to leave," William said suddenly, looking her straight in the eyes. "Stay with me. With us?" Anna couldn't believe what she was hearing. Had her dream come true? Her heart fluttered with joy. She felt a warm wave wash over her, and her face probably turned red. It was a good thing the room was dark and he couldn't see it. Of course she stayed. She and William got married, and Katie became her stepdaughter. But there was one problem. One day, William came home early and heard Anna teaching Katie to call her mum. "No, don't do that," he asked his new wife. "You're not her mum. Katie needs to know the truth. I'll tell her about Helen." Anna was hurt, but she kept quiet. William was the father, and his word was law. From that moment on, her feelings for Katie began to fade. The girl would never be her daughter. Well, so be it. She and William would have other children, and as for Katie, well, she would have to raise her and care for her. After all, she was only there because of this girl. Time passed. Katie grew up and began to look more and more like Helen, her mother. There was always a close bond between father and daughter. It was as if William understood the girl without words, and she him. This infuriated Anna. It made her feel like an outsider and filled her with jealousy. William, as he had planned, told Katie the story of her birth. The girl knew that Anna wasn't her real mother. She genuinely loved her stepmother and sought her affection, but the older the girl got, the more negative feelings Anna had towards her. Katie annoyed her. Her very presence irritated her and took William's attention away from her. When Katie turned 7, William and Anna finally had a daughter of their own. The young mother adored her baby Mila. Waves of love and tenderness washed over her heart when she looked at the girl. This was the joy of motherhood. Katie now annoyed her even more. When her stepdaughter got sick one day, Anna sent her to live with an old neighbor for a small fee, of course, so that she wouldn't accidentally infect the baby. She even managed to convince William that this was the only right decision. Anna was annoyed by Katie's attention to her little sister. She was always trying to look at the baby, even attempting to hold her. The new mother would loudly scold the curious girl every time. "Go away! You'll drop her or hurt her. You're so clumsy. Get away from Mila." Katie would retreat to her room, looking hurt. Anna no longer played with her or talked to her. Even her father would only give her a quick peck on the cheek when he came home from work before rushing to the nursery to be with his youngest daughter. He and Anna would stand over the baby's cot together, smiling and cooing at her. Mila grew, and it soon became clear that something was wrong with her. She didn't roll over at the right time, didn't learn to stand or take her first steps. Her parents were worried. Both of them had experience with small children. William had raised Katie, and Anna had a whole gang of younger siblings. They both had a rough idea of how quickly babies should develop. Mila was slowly learning new skills, but much too late and too slowly. What scared them the most was her lack of interest in the world. She didn't reach for bright objects, didn't put things in her mouth, and didn't even try to hold toys. Nothing caught her attention. Her eyes were detached, as if turned inward. Anna would cry as she sat beside her sleeping daughter, hoping it was just a temporary setback, a slight delay in her development. After all, every child is different. William also clung to that thought. No one paid any attention to Katie during this period. They didn't have time for her. Anna spent her days with the baby, looking for the slightest sign of progress. William also ran to Mila as soon as he got home from work. The older daughter felt abandoned, forgotten, and very lonely. She too wanted to play with her sister, but she was chased away. The girl dreamed that her dad would throw her up to the ceiling a couple of times, as he often did with Mila, but he would just wave her off. Anna would snap at her stepdaughter for every little thing, not putting away her toys, not washing her plate properly, not taking out the rubbish on time, laughing too loudly when the baby was sleeping. For all of these things, Katie would get insults, spankings, threats, and sometimes a stinging slap to the face, which hurt and offended her even more. Anna was annoyed by her stepdaughter's very presence, even the way she looked. The woman was furious that this useless girl was so clever, beautiful, and healthy, while something was clearly wrong with Mila. A year later, the younger daughter's problems became clear not only to her parents but to everyone else. William and Anna left Katie with the neighbors and went to London to see the best specialists recommended by the local doctors. The village doctors couldn't diagnose Mila and had recommended more thorough tests, which, of course, were not cheap. They had to spend all their savings in London on medical procedures and living expenses. The result stunned both parents. It turned out that Mila had a rare congenital metabolic disorder that affected her brain. Both parents were carriers of the defective gene. It was just bad luck. There was no cure for the disease yet. Patients were only given supportive care. The medication was very expensive and the results were minimal, but at least it would prevent the disease from getting worse. The couple returned home, sullen and silent. Anna, who had been crying for several days, looked so pale and drawn that Katie didn't even recognize her at first. William did his best to explain to his older daughter what had happened to their family. The girl felt so sorry for her sister. She tried to hug her and felt a powerful blow to her side that sent her flying into the wall and hitting her shoulder. Anna's face was twisted with fury. Her chest heaved. "It's you! You're to blame for everything! You took Mila's health for yourself!" Anna screamed many more terrible and offensive things, blaming the little girl for everything. William barely managed to pull his wife away from their daughter and into another room, where he spent a long time calming her down. Her outburst turned into loud sobbing. Katie was so scared, so very scared. She felt as if a monster had possessed Anna. She also clearly understood that her stepmother was capable of anything. Mila, the cause of all the commotion, sat calmly in her cot. The sounds around her, including her mother screaming, didn't seem to bother her. The girl looked at her surroundings with indifference, and for the first time, Katie felt it. A surge of anger towards the little creature. Her life had been wonderful before Mila was born. Sure, her stepmother had never been particularly gentle or caring, but she had acted so differently. And her father had loved Katie so much before his youngest was born. Why? Why did everyone worship Mila and forget about her? She was trying so hard to be a good girl, washing the dishes, cleaning her room, and dusting. In return, she only got scoldings, frustration, and punishment for every little thing. Katie wanted to be hugged, to be loved, to be protected, to be bought pretty dresses and toys, just like the other girls in the neighborhood. Of course, her father would occasionally give her gifts, but even as a small child, Katie felt as if he was simply paying her off. She felt cold without the attention of the adults she cared about. But Mila got double, if not triple, the love and affection. That's who was to blame for Katie's miserable life. Her little sister was the cause of all her problems. This thought grew stronger in Katie's mind with each passing day. Anna continued to take out her anger on her stepdaughter. She no longer blamed her for Mila's illness, but she found plenty of other reasons to scream at her. Katie tried not to get in her stepmother's way. She was also hurt by her father's indifference. Since the adults had learned about the diagnosis, all their energy, time, and money had been devoted to Mila's treatment. Expensive medicines, therapy, and home exercises. A massage therapist came to their house several times a week, and sometimes medical workers came to give Mila airs. Anna and William did exercises with Mila on their own. They took her to a swimming pool nearly 100 kilometers away from the village. Occasionally, Anna would go with her daughter to a health center or a hospital. When Katie timidly hinted that she wanted to go to summer camp with her friends or to the seaside with her father, she was met with accusations. "The seaside? You don't deserve it," Anna would flare up. "We have to take Mila to a health center. It costs a lot of money," her father would say more gently. It was the same with everything. Mila, Mila, Mila. All the attention went to her. All the money and resources were spent on her. Sometimes Katie felt as if her little sister was mocking her, pretending to be a frozen doll so that the world would revolve around her. Years passed. Mila was now 4 years old. She was still the same girl, indifferent to everything around her. The therapy, in Katie's opinion, showed no results. Her parents, however, were happy with their little girl's progress. Katie would hear them say that if it weren't for these expensive procedures, Mila would be lying in bed, unable to walk. But she could move, go for walks, and even eat by herself. Yet she still didn't seem to perceive the world around her, or she was just pretending. 11-year-old Katie continued to blame her younger sister for being born and taking her father's love and attention away from her. After Mila's birth, William barely hugged Katie anymore. He spoke to his older daughter with frustration and waved off her requests and problems. There was no point in even talking about Anna. It seemed as if the mere sight of her stepdaughter infuriated her, so the girl tried to stay out of her way. Katie would stay outside for long periods, playing with her friends until the very last minute, returning only after everyone else had been called home. That evening she came home especially late. She had been at the hill that the parents had built for the village children near the edge of the woods. The girl had had so much fun. First, the children had a snowball fight. Then they flew down the hill on sledges and inflatable tubes, so fast that the wind whistled in their ears. They raced each other, hooked up in a line, or just tumbled down. She didn't want to go home, but it was getting dark and the cold was getting worse. The children said goodbye one by one and ran home to their parents and the warmth of their homes. Finally, Katie was left alone on the hill. She sighed, anticipating the contemptuous look her stepmother would give her, and began walking towards her house. Halfway there, the girl noticed that she had torn her new jacket. They had bought it for her recently because she had outgrown her old one. Katie had been so happy. She rarely got anything new. All the money went to Mila's treatment. Her parents didn't spoil their older daughter. And now there was a huge tear along the sleeve of her beautiful jacket. Katie could barely hold back her tears. She knew she would have to spend the rest of the winter, and maybe the next one, wearing a patched-up jacket. The seam would be very noticeable. There was no other way to fix it. She was also afraid of her stepmother's anger. Of course, Anna would not miss the opportunity to scream at her for this carelessness. But Katie hadn't expected the reaction her stepmother gave her. At that moment, Mila was playing in the garden. Her father had built her a small hill, and the girl had mastered the simple art of climbing the sand-covered steps to the top and sliding back down. Mila would do this for hours, over and over again. From the look on her face, she didn't seem to feel any emotion. She would just mechanically slide down the hill and climb back up. In Katie's opinion, it was a terrifying sight, especially in the fading light. No one dared to pull Mila away from the hill at those times. The girl would start to scream, so loudly it felt as if her eardrums would burst. They would let her play to her heart's content. Sometimes it took an hour, sometimes 2 or 3. Then Mila would calmly and unperturbed return to the house and go to her room, wearing her beautiful Wellington boots embroidered with beads. She was always bought beautiful, expensive things. "We have to go to health centers in different cities," Anna would explain. "We have to look presentable." In her stepmother's opinion, Katie, who never left the village, was probably fine with cheap things from a discount store. Meanwhile, Katie was growing up and wanted to look beautiful and wear nice clothes. But no one paid any attention to her desires or her requests. A new dress? When Mila has to go to a health center? That costs a lot of money. Katie glanced at her sister, who was getting ready to slide down the hill again. She looked so pretty in her new pink padded jacket and stylish hat with a bauble, like a doll, a girl from a magazine ad. Mum and Dad's favorite daughter. Katie sighed and went into the house. Her father was already home from work, sitting at the kitchen table with a plate of fried potatoes. The aroma was simply divine. Katie immediately realized she was very hungry. Her mouth started to water. "Hey, daughter," her father said, nodding without looking up from his meal. "Finally home. Get your clothes off, and don't just throw them on the floor in the hallway. Hang them up neatly," Anna said, stating the obvious, as if it had ever been any other way. Katie had been trained from a young age to obey perfectly. The girl hung her jacket on the hook and went to the bathroom to wash her face and hands. It was from there, through the sound of the running water, that she heard her stepmother's furious scream. "What is this?" Anna yelled. Katie immediately knew her stepmother had seen the torn sleeve. I'll sew it myself," the girl quickly promised, running out of the bathroom. "You ungrateful girl, you don't take care of your things. You know we don't have any extra money." "How much money goes to her treatment?" "I know, of course I know. I'll sew the sleeve and I'll wear it like this, so that the neighbors can gossip about us not providing for you. The talk is already happening. Why do you complain about me to your useless friends?" I don't. Katie tried to find the right words, but the sight of her enraged stepmother made her stammer. How badly Katie wished she could disappear somewhere far, far away, to a place where no one could ever find her. "Are you deliberately trying to provoke me? Admit it," Anna continued to yell. "Why? Why can't it be the other way around? Why are you a spiteful, ungrateful girl who runs around with her friends, ruins her things, and shames her family, while my daughter, my dear little Mila, was born like this?" When Anna said things like that, Katie always felt an unpleasant mix of fear and disgust. Fear because Anna was jealous of her health and might do something to her. And most importantly, she felt a sharp dislike for Mila. If her sister hadn't been born, her life would have been completely different. Calm, happy, and peaceful. The world wouldn't revolve around this strange, silent girl, and she, Katie, would have had the love and attention of adults. She would have been taken to the seaside, bought beautiful clothes as the only daughter, talked to, and played with. Her father walked from the kitchen to the bedroom without even glancing at the terrified Katie, on whom Anna was hurling one insult after another. And for what? Just a torn sleeve. But of course, even at 11, the girl knew it wasn't about the jacket. It was just a pretext. Anna's feelings for her went much deeper. Dad? Why didn't he protect her again? Why did he walk past her so indifferently, as if he didn't see anything? Katie so desperately wanted his support, his attention, even just one word, a single look of sympathy. But the man didn't have the mental or physical strength for that. William had to work hard to provide for his family and, most importantly, pay for his youngest daughter's treatment. It was hard for him to accept Mila's illness, and Anna exhausted him with her complaints about Katie and life in general. In short, he lacked the mental and emotional energy to deal with his older daughter's moods. Anna knows best how to raise children. She raised a whole bunch of younger siblings, so she can do what she's so good at on her own. George listened to William's story, glancing at Katie from time to time. She was thin, scared, and clearly unloved. He had once been just like that, so he understood William's older daughter perfectly and knew what could happen. He felt sorry for the man and his wife. A child like Mila was a difficult challenge. And yet, there was so much he wanted to say to this man who was holding the little girl on his lap. Katie, as if she had felt the gamekeeper's silent support, suddenly looked him straight in the eyes and, for the first time since she had arrived at the cabin, spoke. "She beat me last night, with a belt." There was so much pain and fear in those words. The girl wanted someone to hear her, to pity her. "Why?" George asked. "For the jacket, because it's ruined, and she'll have to buy me a new one, but Mila needs a new piece of equipment for therapy." "But don't think she hits her hard," William quickly intervened, "just to scare her a little so she'll listen. Otherwise, she gets completely out of control." "That doesn't matter," George replied seriously. "It doesn't matter if it's a little or a lot." The gamekeeper still remembered the burning tears of injustice he had shed from those same punishments. He too had had a stepmother. She loved his younger sister, little Nina, an angel with big blue eyes, but she couldn't stand him. Ivan, even as a young boy, had understood that if something happened to him, his stepmother would only sigh with relief. So the boy had tried. He had honestly tried to meet their expectations. He swam in deep, unfamiliar rivers with fast currents, ventured deep into the forest, and climbed down steep ravines and up tall trees. The village boys saw him as a brave daredevil and respected him for it. But in reality, he was an unhappy, unwanted child. There was so much pain hidden in the girl's eyes that George couldn't help but pat Katie on the head. He wasn't good at showing affection, and he didn't know how to act around children, but at that moment he knew he had to support her in some way. The girl looked at the gamekeeper with gratitude and even gave a shy smile. "She kicked me out of the room," the girl shared. "Told me to get out of her sight. I left." Then William spoke again. "A while later, Anna asked me to get Mila from the garden. I grabbed my jacket and went outside. Mila should have been on the hill. She would never have left that place, but she wasn't there." William stared at the empty hill, sparkling in the light of the street lamp. He wasn't scared yet. Maybe she had just gone to the back of the garden, behind the shed, or to some other hiding place. Although that was strange. Normally, after she was done playing, Mila would go straight home. Nothing else interested her. A flash of hope went through William's mind. What if the treatment was working? What if the doctors had been wrong? Maybe Mila was finally starting to show an interest in the world. William quickly walked around the garden. The cold was getting worse, and it was becoming unpleasant to be outside. But Mila was nowhere to be found. The man ran to the gate. It was always locked, so his daughter had to be in the garden. She couldn't have opened the lock, let alone reach it. She was a special needs child. Perhaps his daughter had gone back into the house while he was searching the garden. William rushed inside. Anna was waiting for him at the door. "Why didn't you bring Mila in?" she asked, annoyed. And the man realized that something strange and very terrible had happened. Mila was clearly not in the house. She wasn't in the garden. So where was she? What had happened? William told his wife that he couldn't find her. Anna sat down on the chest of drawers in the hallway. "You couldn't find her?" "She's nowhere. I ran all over the garden." "Anna, call the emergency services," she said, rushing back outside, loudly calling for her daughter. She checked every nook and cranny, even the doghouse. The girl was nowhere. William tried to find some tracks that would explain what was happening, but the snow was hard from the cold, and there were no footprints. The man ran to the neighbors. They needed urgent and immediate help. Anna called the local police station, which was in the next village. There was only a constable in their own village, who was of no help in this situation. Katie had been sitting quietly in her room all this time. No one was paying her any attention, as usual. The girl saw the neighbors gathering for the search, their faces wrapped in scarves, torches in their hands. They wandered through the village in an organized group, calling out Mila's name, as if her little sister would answer them. Mila never responded, even when her mother called her name. The sound of her own name was just another noise from the world she didn't care about. Then the police arrived. Through the frozen window, Katie watched the blue and red lights flash. But the officers didn't turn on their sirens. Strangely, the police didn't have a sniffer dog with them. A dog might have been useful. It could have picked up the scent before it was too late. Katie put on her parka, the one with the torn sleeve, and ran to the gate. The neighbors were searching the village. The police were knocking on doors and talking to locals, trying to gather some information. Katie sighed. They would never find Mila like this because she wasn't in the village, and Katie knew that for sure. It was she who had led Mila into the woods. The idea had come to the girl while she was crying on her bed in her room. Her stepmother had hit her with a belt. The skin on her lower back was burning, but the emotional pain was far worse. How much Katie wanted her father to feel sorry for her, to just pat her head a couple of times and say something encouraging. Her heart was breaking from loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted. Everyone was running around after Mila. Her younger sister was getting all the love, attention, care, and the best of everything. Of course, Katie wasn't starving. But Mila had a special diet that included plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables every day, no matter the season. And even now, after punishing her stepdaughter, Anna had gone to the kitchen to prepare a fruit salad for her beloved daughter. Only for Mila, because the family didn't have any extra money. Again, because of Mila and her strange illness. And then she heard her father's voice from the hallway. "How's Mila today?" he asked Anna. Mila? When was the last time he had called his older daughter Katie? When had he last even spoken to her? Her father was always so tired. Katie understood that and felt sorry for him, but he always found the time and energy for Mila. He would give her massages, play with her, and do her exercises. He paid no attention to Katie. At best, he would ask about her grades. And even now, he had seen Anna hit her and hadn't even come to comfort her. He had gone to the kitchen to ask his wife about Mila's progress. Oh, if only she weren't here. How wonderful her life would be. Katie remembered the time before her sister was born. Her father spent a lot of time with her then. They would play, he would take her to the river, they would go hiking and visit family together. Her father would take her for rides in the boat and on his motorbike, and he would take her to town for rides and to cafes. And Anna had been so different too, more affectionate and caring. Katie suddenly sat up in bed. She could get that happy time back, that golden age. All she had to do was make Mila disappear. Katie acted almost mechanically, sneaking out into the hallway and quickly getting dressed. The adults were in the kitchen, quietly talking about Mila's treatment plan. It would take money. Her father said he would take out a loan, even though they were already deep in debt. Katie smiled. "No, Dad, you won't have to get into that debt again." Mila's gone, so the problems are gone too. The girl returned to her room, climbed into bed, turned off the light, and pulled the blanket over her head. She began to wait. Her heart was pounding. Katie couldn't understand her feelings. Joy, despair, fear, and glee, all at the same time. And then Anna sent William to get Mila. He, of course, couldn't find her, and it all began. The neighbors, the police, the search, no one asked Katie anything. As usual, they had forgotten about her. But now the girl was happy about it. She didn't know if she could lie to her father's face or to the police. No, she had to stay still, pretend to be asleep. And then, if they asked her, she would pretend to be surprised. It was bad to lie, but she had to get through this so she could live happily ever after. "We searched the entire village," William said, shaking his head. "If Mila had been outside all this time, she wouldn't have survived. The cold was getting worse." Then someone suggested they ask Katie. "I insisted that Katie knew nothing," William said. Anna had punished her, and she had spent the whole evening and night in her room, hurt and angry. "And you didn't check on her, not once?" George asked, surprised. "Katie was crying in her room, and you didn't even talk to her afterwards?" "At first I felt too tired," William said. "And besides, being too soft just spoils boys' children. And then all this with Mila started, and there was no time for anything else." The man was clearly trying to justify himself. Katie carefully listened to his every word. George saw how difficult it was for her to hear. "And what happened then?" "I said that talking to Katie wouldn't do any good." But Anna suddenly clung to the idea, William continued. "We had searched the entire village. The police had called for backup and a team with sniffer dogs. There was nothing we could do, but sitting still was impossible. So Anna rushed to Katie's room. Katie had been tossing and turning in bed all night. Of course, after everything that had happened, she couldn't sleep. The girl's mind was slowly clearing, and she realized what she had done. She understood that even if Mila wasn't found, life would be even worse than before. She would be haunted by guilt and the fear of being found out. And no amount of trips to the seaside, beautiful clothes, or her father's love would ever make up for that. At first, the girl wanted to run into the woods after her sister, alone in the middle of the night. She had to fix everything, and it didn't matter if they yelled at her afterwards, even if they beat her. as long as everything went back to the way it was. But Katie was scared. She knew her sister couldn't have survived several hours in the cold, and she couldn't bear to see what had become of her. After all, it was all her fault, and hers alone. Early in the morning, as the sky was turning pink, Anna rushed into the girls' room. Disheveled, desperate, and pale, her father followed her. Katie looked at the adults with wide eyes. She thought they already knew, but Anna immediately cleared her suspicions with a broken question. "Do you know something? Do you know where Mila is?" Katie shrank under her blanket. She had no idea what to say, but she didn't have to. Anna had understood everything just from her stepdaughter's eyes and face. The woman grabbed the girl by the shoulders and shook her so hard that Katie's head almost snapped off. "Where is she? Tell me, where is she? You did this. I can see it. I can see you did something to her." William had to physically pull his wife's hands off their daughter and push her away. Katie was sobbing, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her father, searching for some support, but his eyes were cold and distant. He looked at her with disgust, almost revulsion. "Where is Mila?" He repeated Anna's question sternly. It was clear that William, looking at his older daughter, had also guessed her involvement in the baby's disappearance. Of course, Katie told them everything. When Anna realized her daughter had spent the entire night in the cold, she gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Then she turned and ran out of the house, probably to look for Mila or what was left of her. Her father ran after her, but not before giving his older daughter such a slap that her ears rang. The mark from the blow still ached on Katie's cheek. William caught up with Anna and convinced her to think clearly. He told her to warn the police and wait for Mila at home in case someone found her first. He then told Katie to get ready. He was going into the woods with her. Only Katie knew where she had left Mila, and that's where they had to start the search. Anna didn't even look at Katie. She was sitting on the sofa in the living room, swaying back and forth like a pendulum, quietly whimpering. It was a terrifying sight. "Look what you've done," her father hissed, looking at his wife. Fear and confusion were in his eyes, and Katie felt the weight of her guilt get even heavier. William asked one of the neighbors they met on their way to sit with Anna. The village streets were usually empty and quiet early in the morning, but now people were wandering around them. The search hadn't stopped for a minute. Katie and William went into the forest. The girl had often dreamed of going somewhere with her father, just the two of them. But in her fantasies, it was a completely different walk. Her father held his older daughter's hand tightly and didn't even look at her. He only spoke once, a short sentence over his shoulder. "How could you do something like this?" "I don't know," the girl answered honestly. At that moment, she truly didn't understand what had come over her. Mila was no longer in the place where Katie had left her. The girl sighed with relief. She had been so afraid of finding a small, frozen body here. "Are you sure this is the spot?" her father asked. Katie nodded. She was sure she had brought Mila to this exact place. William looked around. There were no tracks, no clues. What should they do? Where should they look for the baby? Was she even still alive? Suddenly, the man remembered the rumors he had heard in the village about a pack of wolves in the woods. His heart ached. And then he had an idea. The gamekeeper's cabin was nearby. If anyone could help them with the search, it was him. No one knew the woods as well as that man. And so the confused girl and the scared man appeared on the doorstep of George's cabin early in the morning. Mila was with him, alive and well. The first thing William did was call his wife and calm her down. Then he poured his heart out to George, to whom he would be grateful for the rest of his life. William needed to talk, to share his worries and his pain. And he needed advice. William didn't ask directly, but he let the gamekeeper know that he had no idea what to do with his older daughter now. This was a heavy burden for him, a source of emotional torment. How wonderful it would be if someone could just tell him what to do now. William couldn't understand his own feelings. He was angry at Katie. She had scared him with her cold-heartedness and cruelty. At the same time, he felt pity and tenderness for her. She was his and Helen's child, his only, beloved, long-awaited child. Perhaps what had happened was his fault too. What should he do with Katie? Should he send her to a boarding school for troubled children? Anna would definitely never forgive her stepdaughter for what she had done. How could they all live together under the same roof? George understood everything without a word. He looked at William with a judgmental eye. There was not a hint of sympathy for the grown man in his eyes. But he looked at Katie, hunched over at the table, with understanding and pity. He even patted her on the back and head a couple of times. "Don't be angry at the child," he told William. "This girl has been through a lot of pain if she did something like that. I know her condition all too well. I was like that myself." "I don't know what to do now," William admitted. "You should have thought about that earlier and acted differently, so this wouldn't have happened," George said. "I know, but what should I do now? I have no idea. Just listen to my story while the police are on their way. A lot will become clear." The gamekeeper began his story. George had a happy childhood with his mum, dad, and little sister Nina. They lived in a big village house with a beautiful cherry garden and had a whole gang of friends. The boy felt happy until he turned 10. That spring, his mother passed away. His father was left a widower with 2 children and started drinking. During this difficult time, George looked after his 3-year-old sister, feeding her, dressing her, taking her to and from nursery, and making sure she didn't wander off. He raised her as best he could. It was hard, very hard, but not because he now had to cook and clean. It was because his mum had been the closest person to him, a kind and caring soul who understood him without a word. Now, without her, the boy felt so lonely, abandoned, and defenseless. He couldn't believe it was forever. His father worried little George. His father was no longer the strong, reliable, and serious man who made the boy feel safe. George realized how weak his father was, that he couldn't be counted on. This shook the ground beneath his feet. After a while, George slowly got used to his new role, becoming the pillar of his orphaned family. His father continued to drink and lose his humanity. The neighbors pitied the children and tried to talk some sense into the grieving man. One day, George heard an auntie telling his father that if he didn't stop, the children would be taken away to a children's home. These words scared the boy. Now he was afraid of every knock on the door, afraid that it was for him and his sister. Then, about a year later, everything changed. A new woman appeared in their house. She was Auntie Clara, a single woman who lived a couple of houses away. She was bright, loud, and cheerful, and she confidently took over the household. Next to her, his father began to act like his old self again. He stopped drinking and went back to work. George knew why his father had changed and tried to please Auntie Clara in every way. He helped with the chores, and he listened without having to be told twice. George had forgotten how wonderful it was to have someone who cooked borscht and baked pies. The smell of delicious food was back in the house. But despite George's efforts, Auntie Clara didn't like him. She seemed to be annoyed by his very presence. She would try to send him away with some errand, would find fault with him for the slightest thing, and would often lash out at him. But she looked at little, fair-haired Nina with completely different eyes. She loved holding her on her lap, doing her hair and dressing her up. "The girl is just a doll, a real joy," Auntie Clara would say, trying on another new dress on the little one. She would often walk with her stepdaughter through the village and take her with her to town. The girl responded to Auntie Clara with affection, and one day she even started calling her mum, which caused George almost physical pain. "She's small. It's easier for her to get used to it," his father explained, seeing the boy's state. "And it's better for Nina this way." Such honest conversations with his father were a rarity for George now. He too had become focused on Nina and Auntie Clara, and his son had become an annoyance to him. One day, George took Nina for a walk in the field. He had done this many times before. His sister loved to chase butterflies in the tall grass and look for bright flowers. A neighbor's boy also came with them, bringing his sister, who was the same age as Nina. The children had a fun time together under the watchful eyes of their older brothers. But when George returned, he was met by a disgruntled and worried Auntie Clara. Without a word, she smacked him on the head. While he held his hand to his burning cheek, trying to understand what he had done to deserve this, the woman hit him several times on his lower back with a stick. "What's going on?" George asked through his tears, recoiling from his furious stepmother. It turned out that when she couldn't find Nina in the garden, she panicked. She had run through the village, asking neighbors about the girl, and had even wanted to call the police. But the boys had told her in time that the girl was out walking with her brother in the field. Auntie Clara was just coming out of the gate to get the misbehaving boy and bring her dear Nina back when the pair returned on their own. And so George got a taste of his stepmother's temper. "Never take her out without my permission, you hear?" the woman screamed in the bewildered boy's face. And his father? He stood next to them, heard everything, and didn't even think to stand up for his son, even though he knew that George had been walking with Nina since she was a baby and nothing had ever happened to her. His father's indifference hurt more than Auntie Clara's unfair and cruel words, or even her beatings. If Auntie Clara had tried to control her anger before, after this incident, she stopped bothering. She would call George by the worst names, try to send him out of the house with some errand, gave him the hardest jobs, and showed him no smiles, no affection, no gratitude. His father acted the same way as his new wife, which was the most hurtful part. Nina was bought sweets, taken to rides and the cinema in town, and given beautiful dolls. George got nothing. "You don't deserve it," Auntie Clara would say, justifying herself. "Your grades are bad, you behave disrespectfully, and you disappear for days." George did try to spend less time at home. He would stay out with his friends until it was dark, and if no one was around, he would just go into the woods, where he felt calm and good, no matter the season. The trees didn't insult the boy. They couldn't betray or torture him. On the contrary, the oaks and pines listened attentively to all the sad stories of the unhappy boy. And George had a lot to be sad about. He felt unwanted in his family. The boy annoyed his father and was clearly disliked by Auntie Clara. Even Nina, for whom her older brother had once been her protector, and the person she loved most in the world, started to treat him differently, with a look that was just like Auntie Clara's, even pursing her lips contemptuously when she looked at the boy. George understood that if something happened to him, the adults would be relieved to get rid of another mouth to feed, and he honestly tried to meet their expectations. He would take risks, which earned him the respect of the local boys. They considered George a brave daredevil, but in reality, he was an unhappy, unwanted child. A few more years passed. George became a teenager, awkward and withdrawn. It became unbearable for him to stay at home, so one night he ran away. He took some money from the table drawer, made his way to the coach station. He had to walk a long way, but he had always loved walking, and bought a ticket. He got on the coach and headed for the city. As he watched the fields and forests flash by, the boy thought about his new life that was beginning right now. The unknown was frightening, of course, but anything was better than his current life. At first, the city overwhelmed the boy with its crowds, but he soon collected himself and looked around. He didn't really like it here. He had always been more drawn to quiet, solitude, and nature, but it was worth trying to start a new life. He was approached by some homeless boys who had probably sensed a kindred spirit, understanding that the village boy, just like them, was unwanted. George was happy to be in their company. They accepted him and even cared for him in their own way. The boys lived in an abandoned, unfinished building on the outskirts of the city. They earned a living with small jobs, carrying a suitcase for someone, sweeping the street, or helping unload a truck at a shop. And they also stole. It was scary and fun at the same time. In time, George learned all the tricks and, like the others, started to regularly contribute to the common pot. Of course, they would get caught from time to time. One day, George was caught. A big, fat man with small, angry eyes grabbed him by the arm and wouldn't let go despite the boy's pleas and tears. He dragged him all the way to the police station. And so George ended up in a young offenders institution. He didn't even want to remember what he went through there. It was difficult, very difficult, a living hell. "That's how I ended up spending time in that terrible place," George said to his attentive listener. William flinched at his words. It was clear that George's story was making a strong impression on him. This was good. Maybe he would finally understand that his older daughter also needed love and care, and that without it, something terrible would happen to her sooner or later, just like it had happened to him. His father visited him at the institution only once. It turned out he had reported him as a missing person, but hadn't helped with the search. Like Auntie Clara, he probably hoped his son wouldn't be found, and everything would just work itself out. But one day, his father was called and told about George's fate. He had no choice but to travel to the next town to meet with his ungrateful son. Seeing his father's face, the teenager burst into tears. He so desperately needed support, even a kind word, a reassurance from a loved one that everything would be all right. But he got none of that. His father scolded him and insulted him. "Clara was right all along. You'll end up in prison. It's no wonder she tried to shield Nina from your influence. She's a smart, perceptive woman." "But wait," George said. "I got in with the wrong crowd. It was a foolish mistake. I have my whole life ahead of me. With the support of my family, I can deal with anything. Why are you acting like this?" But his father just waved his hand. He had already made up his mind. He never visited his son again. George was released a year later. He was almost an adult, a 17-year-old boy with no education, no hope for the future, and no family. Where should he go? He didn't want to go home. He wasn't welcome there. So the boy went to the station, to his old homeless friends, to the place where he was truly wanted. George continued to steal. How else was a homeless boy supposed to survive? And of course, he was caught again. This time, the boy was sentenced to a long term. He turned 18 at the institution and was transferred to an adult facility. It was even worse there. George even began to think about ending his life. What was the point of staying on this earth? Who needed him here? But luckily, he met a kind person, a maths teacher named Andrew. The prison had a school for those who hadn't finished their high school education. The desks were filled with men of all ages, from young boys like George to old men. Unexpectedly, George liked school. He was especially drawn to maths. The teacher, seeing his students' eagerness, encouraged him, gave him extra work, and explained more difficult topics to him one-on-one. "You grasp everything instantly," the man would say, amazed. "You're so talented. How did you end up here?" One day, George told him his story. The boy saw sympathy and understanding in the man's eyes. After that, Andrew became a true friend and mentor to the boy. He helped him finish school with honors, even in prison. He invited a career counselor to the facility, who helped George find his professional interests and skills. He was the one the boy lived with after he was released, while he was preparing to apply to the local university to study forestry and landscape management. Andrew had many heart-to-heart conversations with George. He explained the dangers of his lifestyle, reminded him of what was right and what was wrong, and gave him guidance. Andrew had been in a similar situation himself, and someone had helped him, so he was paying it forward, trying to save a young boy. Andrew's efforts were not in vain. George graduated from university and became a gamekeeper. His mentor would sometimes visit him at his cabin, and George was always genuinely happy to see him. He no longer talked to his father. He had tried to fix things once, after he had become a serious, established man. He bought everyone gifts and went to his family home. But nothing had changed. He still wasn't welcome there. George didn't hold a grudge against his family, but he never sought them out again. He had friends, good companions, and Andrew, and that was enough for him. George never started his own family. He had tried when he was young, but it hadn't worked out. And so he lived in his small cabin in the middle of the forest, and he was perfectly content with his life. If it weren't for Andrew and his support during that difficult time, who knows what would have become of him? Well, it was clear that nothing good would have. William looked at George in amazement. "You've been through so much. Your family and their behavior were just awful. Doesn't it sound familiar?" George looked his visitor straight in the eyes. William looked away. "Our situation is completely different," he tried to argue. "Your child is suffering. You are completely focused on your sick daughter, while your older one deserves your love. She needs it, but we try. It's so hard, you don't understand. Your girl almost did something irreversible. She's in pain, she's suffering. I know exactly how she feels. I was like that myself," George said quietly, so that Katie, who was sitting by the door, couldn't hear. "Save her before it's too late." William lowered his head. It was finally starting to dawn on him how unfair they had been to Katie. He looked at his older daughter with tenderness and pity. She was so grown up, but so fragile and defenseless. Then he carefully put Mila down, went over to Katie, and hugged her tightly. Surprise flashed in the girl's eyes, then joy. Finally, she started to cry, unable to hold back her emotions. Mila looked at the scene with indifference. Poor child, George thought. He genuinely hoped that the treatment would help this pretty little girl. Of course, her parents had a difficult time, but that didn't mean they had to neglect their older daughter. Katie was just as good. William stroked Katie's hair and whispered something comforting to her. The girl slowly calmed down. Looking at this scene, George knew everything would be all right now. William had realized that they couldn't go on like this. He would definitely tell his wife, and it would be for the best for everyone, even Anna. William thanked George at length before he left, for saving Mila and for the frankness that had helped him understand so much. As a last gesture, George patted Katie on the head and told her she could visit him anytime, after telling her parents, of course. The girl smiled and promised to visit his cabin. The gamekeeper knew she would. He would keep an eye on her. He would be Andrew for this girl, if she needed him to be. Every child deserves love, attention, and protection from adults. This story has been written for you to use in your video. I hope it helps you and your audience. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe, leave a comment, and like the video.